Are we live? It looks like we're live. Is everyone here? Do we have people? Okay, well, I think we'll wait for people to come in. Hello, everyone. A slightly different face from what you would be used to with Tristan. My name is Phil, and I will be taking over the hosting elements of this Whiskey Me subscription video going forward. So hopefully you'll all get used to this face. Hello, we've got another Phil. 2 Phils, that's pretty good. We've got a couple more guests to join us as well. We've got features today from both the Glasgow Whiskey Distillery and the Royal Oak Distillery with their Busker line as well. We've got a few more people coming in now. Hello there. But yes, so you will be getting used to seeing me a little bit more. This is our first one. We were hoping perhaps Tristan would have a little bit of a sign-off video or something like that inclined for this, but he's a very busy man. So hopefully we can get that brought in at some point so you can all say a fond farewell on this platform anyway. But yeah, I think we should probably kick things off. Hopefully you've all got your samples with you and that kind of thing. Sadly, I've had a bit of a busy day, so my samples haven't been picked up by me yet. Hello, Conan. Welcome. But I think as we will kick off with the first of our 2 guests today, we can welcome in Libby from the Glasgow Distillery. If she is here somewhere, there she is. Hello, Libby.
Just like that, I appear on the screen.
Just like that, you appear. I know, quite a miraculous thing, this streaming service, isn't it? How have you been today? You okay?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. The sun's been shining in Glasgow, but it's been really chilly. It started at like -2 this morning, I think, but at least the sun was out. So
same in Manchester as well. -1 start, and then got kind of nicer as we go on. Privileged to actually be able to talk to someone about Glasgow, because even though I work for the whiskey shop, my base is in Manchester. So your product is very much kind of focused in both of our Glasgow shops now, which is quite nice, along with many other retailers all around the place. But I think just to kick things off in the best way possible, what is the sample that everyone will be sort of enjoying tonight?
So the whiskey that they should have in front of them is our inaugural release, the original. It's our inaugural whiskey, the first whiskey that we ever produced. That is actually so our double distilled unpeated spirit is like our first cask of the double distilled unpeated spirit is turning 10 years old this year, which is quite cool. So,
yeah, I noted your first ever production date was like the 20th of March 2015.
Yeah. So
it's kind of incredible that you guys have getting to that 10-year point now. I remember when Macar Gin came out, however many years ago, with that jalapeno and tonic serve, and I was like, these guys are pushing boundaries, serving chili peppers with gin, and now we've got nearly 10-year-old whiskey from you folks. So it's quite an incredible development process to think about.
Yeah, we call ourselves as part of this kind of new wave of distilleries, but realistically we're not that new anymore, compared to some that are, just setting up their stills now. There's quite a few dotted around in Scotland that are kind of just at that starting process, and I suppose these guys are the new wave,
I think you can still consider yourselves in that sort of new wave of rush, especially within like the renaissance of lowland whiskey and everything that's kind of happened within Edinburgh, yourselves in Glasgow, Fife. It's all just popping up everywhere. Rosebank coming back to life and loads of other things. Exactly. So it's nice to see all that getting around. Like I said, sadly, I didn't have time to pick my samples up today. I'm assuming you may have the whiskey in front of you now. But of the 3 distillates that you guys make, you have peated, unpeated, this being the unpeated one, and a triple distilled distillate as well, along with numerous experimental cask finishes and all that kind of thing. But we've had comments right now with people saying that they've already got it in the glass, they've had the first sip. Imagining this is probably maybe their first sip of something from the distillery you work for. What should they be expecting? What should they be smelling? What would you describe as like the house style of what you guys are making?
So the original is kind of who we are and what we do in a bottle. It really showcases the quality of single malt that we produce at Glasgow Distillery. The original starts off in bourbon casks. So this is bringing you your usual sweet notes, the vanilla, caramel, those sorts of things. So nice and sweet. And then we have a 6-month finish in virgin oak casks. And that 6-month finish is what's bringing the spice. So you've got a nice balance of sweet with a little bit of spice. For me, the virgin oak kind of brings a bit of a tingle to the tongue, which is something I quite like in a whiskey. It's sweet, but not too sweet, spicy, but not too spicy, warming, but not too hot. It just kind of ticks all the boxes for a whiskey drinker's whiskey, if that makes sense. It's an everyday dram, great for a Thursday night.
As the comments are giving to us, we've got a couple of people who've already said Conan in particular is getting loads of pear on the nose. This is also the first time he's ever tried whiskey from your distillery before. So a first for many, I'm sure, when people are in the comments and who watch this video back to you. Something I was kind of intrigued by, and it's something that's listed on your website, and the bottles are all like 46% and above, I believe. Yeah. Natural color, no filtering, all the stuff a lot of people are looking for now. That level of transparency and accessibility that you guys have is becoming a more normal thing in the whiskey industry. It's very welcomed, I think, from a lot of whiskey drinkers. Whether you're getting a bit of information or loads, I think more is better than none. Obviously, with the 3 founders, that was kind of obviously must have been one of the bedrocks of the idea going forward. But that leads me into the idea of the amount of casks that you guys have is incredible. Just quickly browsing through your website today, and the numerous positive reviews that some of the recent Tokai releases have had that have been peated, and the cognac barrels had incredible reviews coming back. Is there like of yourselves and like the master distillers and the blenders, is there someone who's leading that sort of skinfluence, or are you folks just being like, oh, that'd be really cool, let's get hold of that?
Yeah, so we don't exactly have a master blender as such. There's a team of 3, which is the global marketing manager, my boss Seb, our head distiller Alex, and one of the founders Mike. They're the 3 people that kind of do that first line of sampling and trying things and everything. I think picking casks, as in like buying casks for our spirit to go into, is mainly Mike's input. Obviously, like from the years that we've kind of had now of experience of what our spirit works in, I suppose that's kind of leading on to what we do next, if that makes sense. I think, when it comes to all these weird and wonderful different cask types and everything, it's down to us being whiskey geeks, making whiskey for whiskey geeks. So we're trying all these casks purely out of curiosity. And thankfully, touch wood, they've all worked so far.
From the sounds of it, absolutely. I mean, I got to try the Tokai and the cognac at the sort of tail end of last year. A customer just brought in some samples of them for me, and they taste. I mean, obviously, we've just said that you guys are approaching the 10-year mark, so it kind of makes sense. But they tasted so like deep and complex and intense. It was kind of remarkable, to be honest with you. Someone else is saying it smells like pear drops on the nose too. Pear drop in a whiskey. I imagine the virgin oak's playing a little bit into that as well. Absolutely. But it's nice to know that you folks are just buying barrels purely out of curiosity. I think that's one of the most interesting things I think most whiskey people from here can hear. Especially as you are a smaller independently run distillery. You don't have like crazy conglomerate money behind you and all that kind of thing. It's nice to see that, kind of enthusiasm and curiosity is saying like, we'll get some Tokai wine casks, we'll get some PX casks, we'll get this and we'll get that. That's kind of the things I think a lot of people like to hear.
Yeah, so at the distillery we're not open to the public. Where we are is very kind of industrial, should I say? Okay. And you could spend thousands, if not millions of pounds making our distillery look nice and put some paint on the walls and make the toilets look fancy and things like that, and that we could do that, or we could spend the money on casks and our product, our people, because realistically, what matters is the product at the end of the day. So we'd rather put our money where our mouth is, and have something worth shouting about before putting some paint on the walls. And ideally, we'd like to have some sort of tour, but I don't think it'll ever really be a tour like visitor centre. I think it'd more be like an experience kind of thing. Fingers crossed it'll happen soon. But as I say, our priorities kind of lie a little bit differently. And our focus is on getting the product right, which seems to be working. With all these small batch things that we've done over the past year, we really kind of focused a lot more on shouting about ourselves in the UK, because our first couple of years we kind of spent most of our effort overseas. As a small team, we don't really have the sales team to sell our whiskey, whereas if you distribute it, their sales team does it for you. And as I say, over the last year, we've been able to build a team, and then focus more on the UK. And as I say, I think that's kind of worked well, especially with what we're doing with all these weird and wonderful casts. It seems to have ticked a box with our crowd that are following us, if that makes sense.
Precisely so. I think every time, every time you folks bring out something new, or people just talk about the classic, it's quite sort of refreshing to hear people talk about newer Scottish whiskey distilleries. Obviously, without the classic ones, they are the bedrock of everything. But it's nice to have these amazing offshoots of people just doing these incredible, like weird, wonderful, and classic sort of things. More pear drops on the nose from people in the comments here. Sort of treacle, toffee finish. Yeah. I'd like to buy it and add it to my collection. There you go, Miles. I'm sure there's some sort of somewhere to purchase a bottle at some point within this thing. Two of the questions. This time is flying remarkably fast. You briefly touched on, you folks do produce peated whiskey as well.
Yeah.
For all of I know we're not trying that one tonight, but for those out there that are interested in peat, do we have like the geeky numbers of like ppm levels and all that kind of thing? Is it peated to like a low level, a mid level, a high level, which have various options going on?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep this short for you.
Right.
Yeah, 2015 we started distilling the unpeated double distilled. 2016 we started producing the double distilled peated. 2017 we started producing the triple distilled unpeated. So the peated, one of the reasons that we do the peated is A, to have options, B, the original Glasgow Distillery that was set up in 1770, hence the name.
Dundistill, I believe.
Dundistill, you're right, yeah. It started out as the Glasgow Distillery and then changed its name to Dundistill. So they also did the peated, so it kind of just made sense for us to do it. And as I say, it gives us options. So our peated is polar opposites from, for example, the triple distilled, the literally chalk and cheese. We've got so much potential under the one roof because of these three different styles. The peated, we're cutting at a much lower point, so you're getting these really waxy, really oily, really smoky flavors that come through. So not only is it three different styles of spirit, but the three cut points of the three styles of spirit are different as well. So it's the mouthfeel is different. It's very different. We're using quite heavily peated, I think it's classed as, which is 50 ppm malt. So it's on level with Lafroig and Ardbeg, really. But doesn't come across that way. I think we're using peat from Aberdeenshire rather than Islay. So the peat comes from underneath heather. So it's a much more flora, softer style of peat, which I think really makes a difference. And I think you can actually almost taste that heather, the floral note on this peated whiskey. Additionally, in our core range, the peat is finished in a PX sherry cask for between 6 and 9 months. So you're adding another layer of sweetness. So it's actually quite a good peated beginner, because I'd say it's more of a smoky peat than a peaty peat, if that makes sense.
Less of the kind of medicinal sort of
too
much for people who are starting out. That was actually going to be my kind of follow-up question. So even though you're peaking to such a large level, you've got a nice sweet PX finish to the back of it. So if you've never tried a peated whiskey before, this could also be a very good place to start, which is another really solid point. And then my final point before we move on to the next guest we've got on is about your triple distilled whiskey. I think once we have both of you guys on, we'll circle back around to the end of that again. But obviously there are only, 4 distilleries that are offering anything sort of triple distilled at the minute, 5 including yourselves. And they vary all over Scotland. I think Ben Riach originally talks about triple distilled whiskey back in their founding days of the late 1800s. Hazelburn at Springbank, Auchentoshan, famously around the corner from you folks, was just the idea to bring that into to have deliberate points of contrast, as you briefly touched on, or is it something a little bit more historical again?
So one point, again, having more options under the one roof was a good idea. One of our founders, Liam, is Irish, and the original distillery also did the triple distilled. So there was a couple of reasons. As far as I'm aware, it wasn't meant to happen so quickly, as in we weren't meant to start doing it in 2017, but it came around quicker than we thought, which I think we're all quite glad happened, because triple distilled last year really made some waves. It's I think it was maybe kind of dismissed, sat next to our big dark peated whiskey, and I think maybe as a kind of collective group, whiskey drinkers have maybe kind of come away from big and peat all the time, and something light and easy to drink is actually just as good, that kind of breakfast whiskey, the first whiskey of the night kind of thing. It really I think it's really hit a nice playing field with whiskey drinkers, that you can enjoy that as well as this big peat smoke bomb as well. So yeah, the triple distilled was, as I say, just to kind of have another feather in the hat. It gives us completely different, much lighter, cleaner notes. You can perhaps maybe take away too much of the character with the triple distilled, and it be too light for whiskey drinkers. But I think our triple still has like a bit of a spice to it, which I think is probably the cask build up. We've got a bit of virgin oak in there as well, which is bringing a little bit of spice. So it's not just light and clean, it does have a nice character behind it as well. And I think it kind of sits really nicely with the three as a whole, the triple distilled, the original and the peated. And it kind of makes it difficult for there to be a favourite because they're all so different. But yeah, it's, as I say, I think we've really grown to really love it over the past year or two, really well in the small batch series as well, with whatever cask it's being finished in, for example.
No, that's really good to hear. I think, again, it's just the number one thing we're hearing most from whiskey drinkers now is versatility on the shelf that they've got at home. Yeah. So to have 3 house styles of whiskey that offer somewhat of a classic Irish style, as well as a old school Lowland Scottish feel too, a classic style, and then something heavily peated with loads of sweetness. More can you ask for from one distillery, really? It's kind of perfect all in all. Yeah. But thank you very much for that, Libby. I will move on to our second guest now. But if you hang around, I'll have some questions for the two of you at the end as well. Yeah. But thank you so much for that, Libby. And it seems like the whiskey's going down incredibly well in the comments.
Good.
Thank you so much. And here we have Rory. Some stuff going on in the comments. I wasn't sure if I had something from Glasgow before, but I just found out it was a Whiskey Me exclusive Masala cask from 2 years ago. There you go. We're digging up history as we go along, which is always nice. On the subject of history, we now have to delve into the wonderful well of Irish whiskey. So for all of you that may have 2 glasses, or even are kind of finishing your first one and moving into the second, have a good rinse of water, rinse your glass out. Make sure we can talk about this Irish whiskey in as much depth as we've talked about with the Glasgow stuff. But here we have Rory. How are you doing on this Thursday evening?
Really well. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everyone watching along. Actually, a pleasure to share the whiskey with you and have a dram.
Indeed. Thank you for coming along. It's always it's nice to have what we thought would be 2 quite contrasting whiskies, but obviously we've got an interesting bit of history with the Glasgow stuff here, and linking in quite nicely to yourselves with the Royal Oak Distillery and this Busker release that should be in everyone's glass right now. Yep. As they're all sort of I imagine, pouring and smelling and all that kind of thing, Rory. How did you become involved with the distillery itself? How long have you been working there?
Coming up 4 years. So the Busker, it's been a while. So the Busker sits underneath the portfolio of Disaronno, so it's a Disaronno-owned brand.
Mm-hmm.
Very fortunate that I look after the whole portfolio in the UK. But I've got obviously a soft spot for the Busker. I love everything whiskey. So I actually come from a whiskey background myself. I used to work for a few whiskey brands before. So yeah, a soft spot for Irish in particular as well, especially the single pot still you're going to try today. A lot of body, great for making cocktails as well.
I'm sure hopefully people are saving a little bit of the pouch to be experimental with. But yeah, so your guys' first distillation at the Royal Oak took place 27th of March 2016.
Yes.
Easter Sunday, I think that would have been back in the day. So you're slowly coming up on that nearly 10-year point as well, which is quite incredible. Again, it doesn't seem that long ago we were talking about people putting inaugural stuff into their first bottles, and now they're nearly a decade old, which is quite an amazing thing to have witnessed over this point of time. You guys have got 3 pot stills, 4 column stills, loads of interesting barrel maturation, and you produce 3 different types of whiskey under one roof.
Yeah,
which, you know, between malt whiskey, grain whiskey,
4, because we've got the blend as well.
Oh, there you go. Is that labeled as like single blend, or is it just a blend?
So it's just an Irish blend. So we call it triple cast, triple smooth. So we like to say that you get the whole Irish whiskey experience in a glass. So you've got triple cask, so that'll be a bourbon cask, or also sherry cask, and then a masala cask. So that's another way that Libby and I have a connection with that masala cask. Super potent, those ones. And then we've got a single grain, single malt, and single pot as the distillates that go into it. So the blend itself is really sort of a celebration of everything that the distillery can produce. That's really sort of our go-to. And then the one we're trying today is a little bit more specialist, part of the singles collection. So it's when we bought single grain, single malt, and single pot, just as standalone bottles.
Quite impressive to do in itself. Even significantly bigger distilleries in Ireland aren't really offering that option. So you guys are kind of nailing some interesting points there. As everyone's sort of smelling this, I can see people are diving into it already in the comments. This could be a long story, or it could be a particularly short one. But if you wanted, because I've tried to do research on this, and I found some things, and other things have kind of washed by me without looking at references for other parts of Irish history.
Yeah.
But is there any sort of condensed way we can talk about the history of like single pot distillation? Because
absolutely,
when we talk about it to people in the shop, there's almost like a freeze moment. Because they're like, well, everything's, if it's a single malt, it's in a pot still. I'm like, yes, but, and then there's this sort of other argument that, not argument, but conversation that comes around. So I'll hand it over to you if you want to talk us through like a history of single pot distillation.
Very easy. In the interest of time, I'll keep it snappy. And also, if you see my name, it's a very Irish name, and if you hear my accent, it's a very English accent. So I don't want to side with one part of history. Essentially, Irish single pot whiskey, or single pot whiskey as a category, is only produced in Ireland, and it doesn't actually reference the pot that you use. Single pot whiskey is actually triple distilled on 3 pot stills, which kind of goes against the name. But what single pot whiskey refers to as a sort of like statement or category, basically refers to the mash bill that we use. So it will be R1's 50-50, but it's always going to be a mixture of single malt, malted barley and unmalted barley. That's really the crux of it. But this all came about historically due to the English invasion of Ireland, and obviously it being a colony. There was massive taxation on whiskey. So at this point, Irish whiskey is one of the most exported things in the world. It's definitely the most exported whiskey. It was seen around the world as being the benchmark for what a whiskey should be. Really sort of the peak end of Irish whiskey is still in. So the English obviously wanted a cut of that. So they put a massive tax bill in place. So anything which was exported legally would have to pay a tax. The Irish, on the other hand, were very good at smuggling things, and the British Navy weren't very good at catching things. So the king didn't like that very much. So decided, okay, rather than put the tax at the dock when we're exporting these sort of things, we'll put a tax at the actual malting rooms where we're going to go and pick up your malted barley. Irish being the Irish, we're like, okay, well, how much unmalted barley can you put in a mash bill and still have enough sort of malt in there to actually make the sugar and obviously make the germination and make an alcohol happen, make alcohol possible. So obviously unmalted barley, we can't get that. It doesn't react with the yeast in the same way. They worked out it was roughly 50-50. It gave enough to make a beer, make a distiller's beer. And also it gave birth to this whole new category of whiskey, which is in your glass right now. So the one thing you'll notice with the characteristics of having that unmalted barley in there, so that single pot style, it's kind of halfway between sort of your classic single malt and more like an American rye sort of flavor. There's no actual rye in there, but unmalted barley, when you distill it, it gives that sort of big sort of cayenne pepper kick, that black peppercorn, that clove, that prickly pear when we're thinking about orchard fruits, which actually, to be honest with you, when we're having a nice little sip, it lets you know that it's there, but in a really, really good way. So happy accidents, unfortunate conditions sometimes lead to some amazing drams.
I'm happy to know that I've been reading the right history books, because that was essentially what I read as well. So that's good to know. Like most things in whiskey, it's ended up being a thing either because of avoiding tax or trying to pay tax in the right way. So that's always still solid information to know. A couple of comments going on. People are relating to your name, similar Irish names, but with English accents in the comments. Getting some notes of getting spices, figs, like a kind of Christmassy taste. Yeah. People are noting it's going particularly well with dark chocolate, as I imagine so many other whiskies do. Any kind of chocolate, really, they tend to go really well for. And another comment just in from another gentleman called Phil saying, great to see the recent Irish whiskey revival. An incredible fact that I keep wanting to tell people is that since I think about 1990, Irish whiskey has been the biggest growing sector of whiskey in the world year on year, which in the last decade is quite incredible to think about, with certain brands dominating certain spaces and all that kind of thing, new distilleries all over the world. And, you know, when you look at, we mentioned this briefly with Libby about the foundation bottlings within Irish whiskey of Bushmills and Jamesons and Redbreast and all this sort of stuff. It's incredible to have people like yourselves who work for companies who may even be owned by larger companies who can just be like, well, we're going to do everything that was possible with Irish whiskey, and we're going to just show it off to like the nth degree. And to have a distillery producing 3 different types of whiskey within Scotland and 4 different types of whiskey within Ireland, I think it just goes to show that, you know, even a smaller operation, whether it be independently led or a bigger operation, a bigger funded sort of company, can still give you this huge variety of flavor. Regarding triple distillation, because I know that in itself has somewhat of a history with like tax avoidance and all that. Well, not tax avoidance as it were, but not trying to pay as much to the empirical country that is dominating the landscape. Triple distillation, I think,
it's for excellence, so we'll stick to that.
We'll stick to that. Yeah. I think the one thing that tends to throw people off about triple distillation is how high an ABV it can actually come off the stills.
Yeah,
I know with single malt Scotch whiskey, obviously there's a limit of, I think it's, I can never remember if it's 85 or 95. I think that's like the top end of where it's all come off. But with you guys, with triple distillation plus column stills, what's the kind of average ABV you're taking off at the still, and then what is that being watered down to go into cask?
So for the triple distill stuff, so our single pot and our single malt, it comes around like 76 to 79% ABV. Okay. So not that high. On the column still, obviously, different beast. So that around like 91.
Okay.
Yeah. For a lot of the stuff we put down, so it's actually we do a mixture. So because the one thing we wanted to launch in the beginning was the blend. The one thing that we wanted to have was consistency. So as a distillery, we were the 6th largest distillery in Ireland. And I think the whole plan with the Busker was that the blend was always going to be something that would compete instantly from the get-go to be a rail whiskey, be in your supermarket, that sort of thing. So it was always geared up for that level of production. So we actually went about in a quite unique way. There's barrels aging all over the place in all different conditions. There'll be some outside. There'll be some in brick houses which are painted black, so it gets hotter in the summer. There'll be stuff which is just sitting there with a little bit, maybe 20% dilution. Some will actually be just like barrel strength, just straight as it comes off the still. And that's really because the one thing that we need to keep is consistency. So we want someone to taste the blend and have the same experience as they had when we first launched it. But the only way we can possibly do that is by having all these different bits at our fingertips. So it's not necessarily about aging something, keeping an eye on one barrel. It's having multiple different options so that we can then go, okay, we need a little bit of that to bolster that. We need a little. So when it's in the bottle, it's identical. So it's a bit of a funny one, so especially when I talk to bartenders, that sort of thing. You want an exact answer, but that is pretty much what it is. It's all geared towards making consistency in that blend. So they're all over the place.
No, that makes sense. I mean, when it comes to vatting together single malts or putting together single pot still batches, again, I think one of the biggest things that's underplayed in whiskey is the idea of blending legally is a different thing, but in terms of vatting something together to create it to be as close as the previous one, I will never forget chatting to the man who probably still has the best name ever in whiskey, the former master blender of Johnny Walker and Dr. Jim Beveridge. I cannot believe that's his real name. That's remarkable. But I remember meeting him at a launch, and it's just like, how do you make a batch of Black Label? Yeah. I mean, obviously there are a few throughout the year, but when it comes to outsourcing stuff as a blender, or even using your own stocks within your own distillery, trying to find those perfect kind of honey barrels that add this particular flavor, or they take this particular flavor away, which makes it more balanced. Mm-hmm. People think that's like the best job in the industry because you're just trying casks, and it's like, it is. It's got like a fun element to it, but you've also got to get it absolutely right every time. Mm-hmm. And I find that job. I think I've got a good nose and palate, as I'm sure many other people in whiskey do. But to be able to do that consistently, for me, is like a remarkable feat. It's like being like a super top end Michelin star chef or something, and watching everything come through the pass is like exactly how you want it. So hats off to you guys and Libby's team as well, because that is pretty remarkable to do that, especially at those higher ABV rates. The way it's going to get into wood a little bit quicker,
Yeah, big thing that comes into play as well is obviously our whiskey is very young. We're a brand new distillery, so most of the stuff we put out was 4 years. If you have one massively hot summer and one massively cold winter, in the space of 4 years, that makes a huge difference. If you're going for like a 12-year age statement, it doesn't really have as much effect. But that's exactly the reason why we need to sort of future-proof ourselves, because if we've got something sitting there and it's just all been aged in that one massively rapidly aging hot summer, it's going to be completely different to the rest of it. So it's all about picking our battles, really. Picking our battles with Mother Nature, so we say.
Yeah, I think that's another part of the industry which possibly a lot of people don't think about. It's there's only so much you can do outside of hoping the whiskey takes to the wood in the best way possible over certain amounts of time. A question in the comments, something which I actually forgot to ask you, Rory. Phil asks, is there a story behind the name the Busker in itself?
Yes, actually there is. So the Busker's whole sort of concept is it's basically a new to world Irish whiskey. So the reason we do the full Irish whiskey experience and the reason we bottle quite young is because we wanted to bring a new whiskey drinker into the fold. We didn't want to make a brand that was going to be unattainable, sit on a shelf. We wanted to be sort of like loud and disruptive in your face, but also bring some sort of educational piece as well. So it was a conscious choice to have single malt, single grain, single pot, and then a blend. Because if you can try them all separately, then you understand what happens in the blend. So whenever I do tastings, for example, I always go through the more expensive ones, shall we say, first, which are the single editions, and then do the blend, because then you should get all the sort of subtle nuances of it. But really, the Busker was about adjusting at a time. So at a time where Irish whiskey is like super, super traditional, we wanted to kind of break a mold and think on our feet. So in the same way as a Busker was, you play to a crowd and you entertain a new group of people. That's where it all really come from. So it's basically all about being dynamic, thinking on your feet, and kind of adjusting to a new crowd.
That's pretty good. That's I think with a lot of other names that we've seen in the whiskey industry in the minute, I was expecting not as interesting a story, not in like a bad way, but that's a perfect reason to call that whiskey that. That's very, very good. Playing to what is, the feel and the vibe and everything at the time. I think that's a brilliant name for it. Regarding the whiskey itself,
we've got a live music gig.
Precisely, yeah. We've got a couple of people. Look, the pepperiness of this. I would have sworn there was actually rye in it.
Yeah. All the unmalted barley. So unmalted barley on the nose, you get sort of like a lot of sort of like clove oil. You get that sort of cayenne pepper, a little bit of sort of like darker chocolate. If you try out, obviously we've got similar liquid to what the malt is. We also say it's the same malted barley. If you try the malted barley as a separate bottle, it's just all completely milk chocolate. On the single pot, you get a lot of dark chocolate. So it just shows you how obviously that raw product is being affected by having that malted barley. You still get a lot of the same characteristics what you get in our malt, but it's just another added dynamic.
Yeah, I've always found that with single pot still style whiskies too, the unmalted element just tends to bring like a lot more sort of textural feel to it as well.
For sure.
Every time I drink, like Redbreast is probably like the most famous example, but every time you go to any of those bottles, there's always like buttery, soft flavors, and there's kind of like gentle pepperiness, just kind of counteracting that a little bit. So that's always really fun to know. But thank you for that, Rory. I think we've still got about sort of 10 minutes left or so. I don't think I've got the power to mute you, Libby. I don't know if you've done that on your own or not.
I did, yeah. I need
to. You have? Oh, good. I thought I pressed a button. Something wrong. Thank you. All my tech was about to disappear then. But yes, so I think just as we've got the two of you here now, and we've got a few of the comments far enough so far in terms of the Glasgow style, almondy, pear-driven, that little bit of spice, perfect. Like, is it aperitif or digestif? I'm assuming it's aperitif at the end.
Yeah.
Feel free to correct me on that if I'm wrong. But it has almost like that soft, desserty quality, virgin oak, bringing that kind of super caramel-driven vanilla thing to it, which is always nice. And then with the Busker, you've got those more peppery, dark chocolate kind of notes running around there too. A little bit more of the alternative, maybe having this instead of the coffee after the end of the meal, which is always quite nice. One question for each of you. I don't know, Rory, you've already mentioned cocktails and working with bartenders and that kind of thing. Libby, have you done much of that with the Glasgow stuff, or is that something like someone else deals with? Or
do you know, it's something that we've kind of started looking into. So as I say, we've not really done. We've only kind of just started working on the UK market, and with that, hired my newest colleague David, who's joined us in October, and he is our bar guy. He at the moment is running into all the different bars around Glasgow and Edinburgh predominantly, kind of figuring out England a little bit as well. London, Manchester, and Birmingham are kind of our areas of focus this year. But yeah, so he's kind of been playing around with it more than we ever have. Kind of speaking to these bars and getting their own spin on our products. I suppose there's just to kind of pick a few, obviously the whiskey sour is a classic. We've done like some highballs with triple distilled. Last year we did a triple distilled tequila finish, which was like a really refreshing whiskey, specifically in these kind of nice and easy to drink highballs. But yeah, I think we also do a blended whiskey called Malt Riot, which is a great Glasgow history story. Feel free to have a read on our website. It's got a great kind of full timeline about it. And that's kind of been more our cocktail whiskey, but it's been interesting to see how the single malts kind of hit this cocktail market as well. I think maybe we'll come with like a signature serve for each of the whiskies, maybe by the end of the year, once we've kind of, had a year in the bars and figured out what works, what doesn't. But I think it's definitely something that's going to come for the 1770 range.
No, absolutely. I think with not necessarily just the international tourism, but just with the busyness of Glasgow, the craziness of Edinburgh, they're just kind of like monster cities that don't really stop. There's always something happening somewhere. So it's always nice to see. But the incredible way that a cocktail can introduce people into whiskey is mind-boggling. So that's always good to know. And then the same question to yourself, or is there like for this particular version of the Busker or any other sort of products you guys have, is there like a straight serve or something you'd recommend at home?
So not specifically for the single malt. I mean, I can recommend something for the single malt. So I actually used to be a bartender. That's why I always talk about
There
cocktails.
we go. Perfect.
Yeah. That's like my go-to, you know. You're a bit stressed out, talk about cocktails. So the single pot, I think the best way you can serve it is something which is sort of what we call stir down and brown. So when we're thinking about things like Manhattans, we're talking things like old fashions, these styles of drinks, really you want to let it shine. So it's got so much depth of flavor, you want to enhance the flavors it already has. The sherry cask that we use for it is super nutty. So I'd go for a twist of a Manhattan, something with like a really sort of like nice but quite floral vermouth, so a sweet vermouth. Stir down. You can, if you want to push the boat out, put a little bit of Oloroso sherry in it, like a little bar spit. That's going to bring out all the notes of what we've already put into the barrel. And then just some simplistic Angostura bitters. Spray a little bit of orange over the top for a little bit of zest. But that way, I think you can make it shine. Beautiful, beautiful drink. And it's a sipping drink. It's something that you respect over time. But that's the one serve, I'd say, and an old fashioned where you can put it in and it will start off super sweet because obviously you've got that sweet body from the malt, which is being backed up by the sweet vermouth and the sherry. But also the dryness at the end. So it's a super strong drink. There's no mixer in there. It's all alcoholic ingredients. And those bitters, that's really going to bring that spice through. So you should, on the finish, get sort of like bacon spices like nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves. I'd go for that. I mean, I've had a few in my time, so I can vouch for this.
I imagine so. I think, Manhattans are a particularly interesting way to make any whiskey to sing out a little bit more. Just, I think when you explain it to people, like it's essentially like a whiskey martini, I think people tend to understand it a little bit more. It's just a bit of booze, some boozy bitters, and then possibly something a bit sweet to just push it. Because I think with old fashions,
two parts whiskey, 1 part of the vermouth, and then 2 dashes of bitters. So the way you can remember, in fact, no, sorry, I've got it wrong. 3 parts whiskey, 1 part vermouth, 2 dashes of bitters. The way you remember Manhattan is the area code for Manhattan is 321.
Oh, there you go. That's very clever. Things that bartenders know that the rest of us just don't. You guys have got like a secret code for many, many different things. But we've just had a comment as well about old fashions. And I think so many people now, I don't know if it's still the most served cocktail in the world. I know the Porn Star Martini overtook it at some point in the last couple of years. But the old fashioned's never too far behind. I think most people now can make a competent one of those at home. You can get sugar syrup from anywhere. You've got so many different whiskies in your cabinet to experiment with. Excuse me. Do different things.
Give you a solid tip for an old fashioned if you want, and this works with every whiskey, so it's not just a Busker thing. If you make a sugar syrup, so literally 1 part of sugar, and then 1 part of boiling water, you put it in. Peel a whole orange, reduce it down, put that in the fridge. Put some Angostura bitters inside as well. Sorry. Put that in the fridge, and then you basically got a syrup which you can pour out 15 ml of any whiskey you want, and then you've already got that orange oil, you've already got the sugar, and you've already got the bitters. So less of the faff, two ingredients poured over ice, and you're done.
I mean, that sounds particularly delicious. We've just had another comment that says, "I think we need to send out Rory's cocktail next month. What's it called again?" I mean,
we'll call it a single pot Manhattan. Done.
Yeah, you can call it a single pot Manhattan or the Red Busker or something like that. I am not the person to speak to about that, unfortunately, but we will feed that back to the folks who bottle everything. I'm sure Rory might have another email about a huge batch of Busker Manhattan to send out.
That's absolutely fine.
Not a bartender's favorite thing to do, batching cocktails, I imagine. But yeah, as we approach the 45-minute mark, I think that's good. Like incredible information from the two of you about two geographically different but kind of similar distilleries in many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite incredible, to be fair. Amazing feedback in the comments. Everyone loving all of the whiskey, even mentioning like adding a little bit of water to bring out a little bit more flavor or some flavors you might not get normally. But yeah, an incredible sort of start to 2025. Like I say, you'll be seeing my face a little bit more for those of you here, and obviously we'll have some different guests on next month. But thank you so much to yourself, Libby. Thank you, Rory, for giving up a little bit of your evening to us. It's always very kind of you. And yeah, we'll sign all that off. I hope you all have a great night, everyone in the comments, and enjoy those 2 drams.
Cheers. Thank you.
See you, guys.
Bye.